Good morning, everyone. I want to start with a big thank you to Nidhi, who invited me to give this talk about my passion on plant-based eating. And I appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for showing an interest in this and coming to hear a little bit more about this. Appreciate that. So let's get started.
Where is it?
Where is that? Someplace in Ireland. Eat your vegetables. I'm sure you've all heard this phrase from your mother or some other caring adult in somewhere in your lifetime. But is there any value to that phrase? I am Maureen, and I eat a lot of plants. So I might be slightly biased on this, but today I'm not actually going to be talking about my own personal journey. I'm really looking to present some of the evidence about this. But if you'd like to hear my personal journey, connect with me over coffee, and I'm happy to share.
Is coffee a plant?
Lemon water. As far as I know.
That's I just want to know. I'm going to eat some plants here.
That's be black though.
Yeah, but you have a little cow in there, right?
Yeah.
Cow
Can't put any milk in it.
Couple objectives here. Looking at the standard American diet and comparing it to the recommended daily intake of fruits and vegetables, and then also giving some examples of how whole food plant-based diet can actually prevent and even reverse some chronic lifestyle diseases. So let's start out here with my story about Al. So Al at 48, he was 5'11", 180 pounds, not that heavy, but he was a bicyclist, doing about 12 miles a day, and that was his fun activity. He was actually a landlord as his job. But at somewhere in the middle of his 12-mile cycling experience, he ended up with angina and ended up with a cabbage, a 5S cabbage. And he said it felt like his ex-wives threw him in a gunny sack, beat him with baseball bats, and then threw him down the stairs. He says, I did not want to go through that again. He says, I got religion. I started on the American Heart Association diet and went and cut my fat down to 20 to 25%. So he continued his exercising and living his life, but somewhere around 68, he ended up with another stent. And not too much later, he had some difficulty tolerating statins and another stent. By 78, he was experiencing shortness of breath just about with any activity and having chest pain with just about any activity. They placed him on Indura and Renexa, and the result of that was falling down the stairs. He didn't tolerate that medicine very well. At this point, he was going to the ER almost every month, either for actual chest pain or otherwise for GERD, which mimicked chest pain. And he says, he says, Kaiser was losing a lot of money on me heading back and forth to that ER. But he says, I really was so afraid that he ended up canceling his trips and vacations and just stayed close to home because he was afraid that he couldn't be away from this life-saving care. Well, Kaiser sent him over to cardiac rehab, but they refused to give him the exercise arm because he actually had angina with every bit of movement. So he was introduced to the whole food plant-based diet. And could this actually reverse his disease? Well, they suggested that he look at these 3 books, but he bought them and read them, and then he decided that this might be a plan for him. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of Esselstyn's work here. Esselstyn is the one who wrote this book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, and then he also published his study here about his patients. So in this study, what you see is there was 24 patients who had severe coronary artery disease, and he asked them all to go on this low-fat, whole-food plant-based diet, and there was a small amount of low-fat milk allowed as well. The goal was to bring people's cholesterol down to 150, which is the number that he had seen in cultures around the world where coronary artery disease did not exist. So 18 patients were able to stick with the plan, but within the first 12 months, 6 patients returned to standard care. Those that stuck with the plan had a cholesterol lowering right away down under 150. No new coronary events at the 5-year mark, and no progression and some reversals even of the coronary artery disease. He decided to do another follow-up study with these individuals at the 12-year mark. Now, one patient had actually died non-autopsy. They noted that there was no disease progression in the coronary vessels. The 17 patients had continued adherence to the plan, and their mean cholesterol was now 145, still no new coronary events. Remember, these very same 17 patients had, in the 8 years prior to the study, 49 coronary events. The 6 standard patients now had 13 new coronary events. This was one of his images that's in his book that I think is really impressive, and was the thing that actually got Al to think, I'm going to do this, because he had seen his own images looking at this narrowing of a diseased vessel and how with this plant-based diet in a little over 2 years, it opened up. Let's look at Al's cholesterol. You can see it wasn't actually that super high. It's just in the 200s, right? So it was not that remarkable. And he also happened to have a little kidney thing going on. Okay, so you can see his GFR was declining, and they actually did send him, Kaiser's very proactive, sent him to the all-day kidney class where he learned that this was just going to progress and not improve. Okay, so you know my day job is to help set up people for dialysis. And these 2 women really stood out to me in the last couple of years. Mostly because they're so young, and I'm having to put them on dialysis when they're 20 years younger than me, and I really didn't enjoy that. It made me a bit sad. This first patient here, she had type 2 diabetes, and her mother had also had type 2 diabetes and been on peritoneal dialysis. And so she had actually taken care of her mother until her death, and now she was taking care of her father. And I asked her a little bit about her diet, and she told me very proudly, oh, I'm on a very high protein diet with animal proteins at every meal. I said, what about some fruit, grains, vegetables, legumes? She says, oh no, my primary care provider put me on this keto plan so that I can help lose a little bit of weight and get my diabetes under control. She actually, during the time of this, lost her kidney function very rapidly. And I would say that primary care provider, even though he was well-intentioned, was not well-informed about the impact of having that kind of plan for somebody with kidney disease. My other patient here is more of an autoimmune picture, a little higher BMI, and she had actually biopsy-proven FSGS. And really, when I asked her about her diet, she was like not interested, which I notice a lot for heavier patients. They're a little bit resistant to giving any diet details. But I just kept pressing and saying, I just want to know what this is so we can work on that. She said, well, I don't eat breakfast. And I'm working, so I usually go out for fast food at tacos or hamburgers. And then for dinner, what do? I take the family out for either fast food or sometimes we go to Hometown Buffet. I said, well, when you go to Hometown Buffet, what vegetables do you eat? I don't like vegetables. Do you think this is the problem? Honestly, at the time, I didn't know, but it started my wheels churning. So is there actually an optimal health-promoting diet for humans? This is not a sausage. What pressures did the human gut evolve under? The early human diet was omnivore and fully unprocessed, since there was no Kraft or General Mills around, right? And so this is a coprolite, which is a fossilized human stool. Okay. And we now have the capacity to actually analyze the DNA in it and know what bacteria are present and know if they're fiber-loving or not. So the author writes here, over 99% of man's existence as a distinct species, his GI tract has been exposed to selective pressures exerted by a coarse, high residue fiber of plant tissues. Essentially, if you were eating, you got your fiber. It was always happening. So how much fiber are we getting now? Well, we only recommend 20 to 35, but you know, we Americans have freedom, so we don't do it. Well, date. And then you look at what the coprolites demonstrated. Well, here they were getting 150 to 250. Can't even imagine eating that much fiber, right? So let's just look at some of the trends in the last 100 years for the food consumption. You can see in sugar, oil, cheese, and meat, our consumption has just skyrocketed. But fruits and vegetables, we're really just dumping out the door, right? So the standard American diet, the acronym for that is SAD. Okay. The National Cancer Institute did a report just looking at what is actually recommended and how many patients actually or people are eating that. So 75% of Americans do not eat their 2 cups of fruit a day, and that's like 2 apples. And 99% of Americans do not eat their minimum of whole grains, 3 to 4 ounces, which is like 2 slices of bread. And only 1 in 500 children eat the equivalent of a single leaf of romaine lettuce a day. Yippee, that's what the survey says. So what is America eating, right? Well, 62% processed and refined food, of course, and another 26% eat eggs and dairy, and a very small amount of whole plant food. So I would say that industry marketing is working, right? We don't see them advertising broccoli to us. We see them advertising pizzas and tacos on the TV or computer. But the reality is that the only place that you're going to get fiber is here with plant food, right? So America is severely constipated as well.
Maureen,
Yeah.
how did the coprolite people have 100 grams of fiber when you would think they would just catch animals and eat?
Yeah, so the reality is that even though they were omnivores, animals were a lot harder to catch than the plant material. And therefore, most of the time, they were in a state of needing food, and so they were eating what they could get a hold of. And so the plant material, because it's very calorically undense, you could eat huge amounts of it. And hence, they couldn't have that much fiber into that. Because you're right, it's like, how could you even fit that much in, right? But that would be my theory on it.
The other thing is also to keep in mind for us, applying that to us, a whole apple has 17 grams of carbs, 3 grams of fiber. A whole bowl of lettuce has less than a gram of fiber. So they're good for you because they're calorie light and they are voluminous, but if you were going to aim for 50 grams of fiber a day, you would have to be eating as much lettuce as a cow. So a lot of that fiber has to come in through our starches, which are currently completely devoid of fiber.
Yep. Okay, so what if we actually just stopped eating animal products and it looked more like this? Do you think that would actually improve health? So the State of the U.S. Health Report shows that our #1 risk factor for death is our diet, even outmarching tobacco. We have a very committed relationship with our fast food. However, at UC Davis, we have this lovely integrated medicine department, and they have published our whole food plant-based diet guide. And this you can think of as a plate, and I have a couple of those refrigerator magnets at the back if you want to grab one of those, or on your way out. So here, if you think of this as a plate, you can see we want to eat lots of leafy greens, cruciferous, non-starchy vegetables, and some fruit. And then the other half of the plate is some of those resistant starches and legumes, and a little bit, 1 serving a day, of some kind of more fatty material like nuts and seeds. So not only UC Davis, but the Lancet is interested in recommending some things about diet. And they actually commissioned the EAT report because we're expecting about 10 billion people on the planet by 2050. And so looking to have both a healthy human population and a sustainable world, they commissioned this report. This was led by Walt Willett, who's at Harvard in their School of Public Health, and then a global team of experts joined them. And their recommendations were that we needed to see a greater than 50% recommendation in the consumption of unhealthy foods like red meat and sugar, but also a 100% increase in the consumption of healthy foods like nuts, fruits, vegetables, and legumes. And you can see their target here. For beef is 14 grams, which is about 1/2 ounce a day, is all you're going to get. So that isn't that much. Okay, what makes food healthy? Can we find the magic ingredient? And this is my little component on supplements, because sometimes it's like, oh, give me just a multivitamin and then I'm good for the day, right? Well, let's see if that's true. So I think I've mentioned this to you all before, where they looked at beta-carotene. They were in a meta-analysis of 19 studies at over 500,000 people. It shows that beta-carotene actually is associated with a decreased risk of lung cancer. But when they gave smokers a beta-carotene supplement, they had to stop the study because it was increasing lung cancer and prostate cancer. So is a supplement the same as the whole food? How about Brocomax? You get a half pound of broccoli in every capsule is what the manufacturer says, right? So they put this head to head against 6 capsules of Brocomax, which would be like 3 cups of broccoli, against 40 grams, just a little over an ounce of broccoli sprouts. What did they find? Well, they were looking in particular at the isothiocyanate, sulforaphane, and ursin. And what did they find? Well, the broccoli sprouts had a beautiful peak in the plasma, but wimpy from the supplement. Wimpy, right? You're just not going to get the same thing from a supplement like you would from whole food. This is T. Colin Campbell, who's the author of this book, Whole. He was a 28-year NIH-funded professor in nutritional biochemistry at Cornell. And he's done a lot of the work around this. Well, in his book, Whole, he actually talks about Dr. Lee, who was in his lab, looking for vitamin C in 100 grams of apple. And what they noticed was that when they measured it, there was over 1,500 milligrams of vitamin C-like activity in this 100 grams of apple. But when they went to isolate the actual vitamin C, how much was present? Only 5.7 milligrams of vitamin C. So where did all that other activity come from? He proposes, well, it's like there is other vitamin C-like chemicals in the apple, or the possibility that vitamin C is more effective in the context of the whole apple. So the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts. It matters how it's packaged. So whole plant food has our macronutrients, our micronutrients and phytonutrients, vitamins, minerals, water, and fiber, and one more element, microbes. And I would even say healthy magic. There's some things we don't know yet, and I want to make sure I'm getting those, and I think our patients might want to too. So can food prevent or reverse disease? This would be important for us when we're talking to our patients. So we've already talked just a little bit about Esselstyn's work on reversing cardiovascular disease, but let's talk a little bit about the stuff that we see in nephrology. So this is from the Adventist Health Systems 2 study, and it's a preliminary results. They basically stack the individuals, saying those are those on a standard American diet, those that have cut meat back some, then those that have gone to just fish, and then those that are just eggs and dairy, and those that are completely plant-based. So what you can see is the more people have gone down this journey, the better the BMI, the less the prevalence of diabetes, and the less the prevalence of hypertension. What I would criticize is that in this study, they were not really speaking to whether the plant food was whole or processed. So it would be nice to see that pulled out when they do further analysis. In this EPIC study, we're seeing that there's an increased incidence of diabetes with increased meat consumption. So this was done over 8 European countries, about 12 years, and they had the incidence of about 12,000 diabetics occurred out of 350,000 in the study. And for every 2 ounces of meat a day, there was an 8% increased risk of diabetes, and it was 13% for processed meat. How does diabetes respond to unprocessed and fiber-rich food? So this is an older study, but it's so good I had to include it. And you can see it's older because it only included men.
I only had men.
Men are wonderful, but we'd like to have some women in there too. Okay, so these men had diabetes and were on insulin, and they put them on a high carbohydrate, high fat, high fiber diet, not high fat, high fiber. You want to get those words mixed up. Okay, so what happened? In the group that they had 20 patients, and they were starting out with about 26 units of insulin, and they made it down to 11 while they were on this high carbohydrate, high fiber diet. But notice, 9 out of the 20 actually completely reversed their diabetes. How many months did that take? Well, the duration on average was 16 days. So pretty darn fast. I think the most impressive is patient number 9, who for 20 years had been using around 20 units of insulin. He dropped to 0 in 13 days. Years and years on a medicine, and boom, that's the power of plants, right? Okay, they also happen to lower their cholesterol. This is important. If you actually give patients this recommendation, patients do this too quickly, they can drop their sugars very rapidly. So please let them know if they're going to get vigorous with this, that they need to watch those sugars very carefully, because we don't want to have hypoglycemic events when people are trying to make healthy changes. So can blood pressure be lowered with food? Well, we know about salt, but what about the amazing flaxseed? Okay. So this was actually a double-blinded, placebo-controlled randomized trial, which is kind of hard to do with food, right? But what they did is they made these little baked goods, and some of them had flaxseed and then others had wheat bran or something else in it. So the 110 patients, and they were getting either 30 grams of milk flaxseed or a placebo, and observed over 6 months. And look at that. They dropped their blood pressure on average 10 millimeters of mercury on the systolic and 7 on the diastolic. But if they started with a systolic greater than 140, they got even a better drop. So what would you rather munch on in the morning? Okay, can food choices actually protect the kidney, preventing hyperfiltration, preventing microbiome? We know, for those of you not in nephrology, hyperfiltration is one of those early signs that the kidney is under stress. It's tofu versus tuna. So I love these studies. Whoever thinks these things up, this is great. Okay, so they had, this is like an Iron Chef challenge, right? So they had 11 normal volunteers and 30 diabetic volunteers. And some of the diabetic volunteers had no proteinuria, and some of them did. So in the ones that had no proteinuria here, so this was your normals and the diabetics with no proteinuria. Here you see that even normal people hyperfilter when they're on the tuna fish meal, and so do diabetics. But yay for the bean curd! Big kidneys love it, no problem. Get your protein and not end up having any hyperfiltration, right? So in this look at the Nurses' Health Study data, both in diabetics and non-diabetics, 2 servings of red or processed meat per day are associated with a 50% increased odds for microalbuminuria. And just so you know, a serving of bacon is actually just over a strip of bacon. So that's only 2 strips of bacon, right? Well, what can we say? Is it the higher net acid excretion is associated with the lower EGFR? That's what this study was showing. And of course, the acid is a lot in our animal products, right? Although there is some in the grains as well. But our vegetables are more alkalizing, so getting those included as well. So our plant proteins recommended with a declining kidney function. You may be aware of what the diet is that we usually recommend to patients, right? This was actually looking at lower mortality the more plant protein patients ate, and they looked over the USDA survey data, and about 5% of patients had an EGFR less than 60, and for that group, they looked at what percentage of plant protein they were eating. And you can see the more they dove into the plant proteins, the lower their risk for mortality. So I think it would be fair to offer that to patients if their GFR is declining. Now this study, I love our friends in the Mediterranean. This came out of Spain. They have all that wonderful food there. And they were saying, what about this diet that we give to especially our dialysis patients, but really to any of the CKD patients? One of the classic things we do is we actually tell them to give up all whole grains and give up all the legumes, because whole grains have phosphorus and so do beans. And what they're saying is maybe it's time to reconsider, because there's more to the picture than that. If you actually know that when you're getting fiber with that phosphorus, it goes right on through, so it does not cause hyperphosphatemia. What the vegetarian diet, and this is a graph from their from your article as they analyzed a lot of the literature in this article. I would definitely recommend it. Just came out this year. If you're in the dietitian's field, it would be a good read for you. The vegetable-based diet has a lot of advantages, in particular to the gut, intestinal motility, improved microbiota, production of short-chain fatty acids, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, and also getting rid of uremic toxins. The vegetable-based diet is notorious for reducing blood pressure, reducing the incidence of diabetes, and decreasing mortality. The big risk is potassium, so we do have to give some instruction around that. So how bad is this processed plant food? This is my absolute favorite study ever. It was done out of JACC, the Journal of American College of Cardiology, and they looked at processed versus unprocessed food. And here it is. We consider plant food to be something that's healthy for us, but can we actually make it harmful for us? So here they really went to town when they looked at all the data from the Nurses' Health Study 1 and 2, and also the Health Professional Study. And then they really tried to adjust for all these different factors. So what did they find? On the plant-based diet, they put out just looking at all plant-based. What happens is the more plant-based foods you're eating, both healthy and unhealthy, there was a reduced risk for coronary heart disease. But if you separated out the healthy plant-based version, it was statistically more. And then when you separated out the unhealthy, look at that. You've created something harmful from something that was helpful. And then if you add in the element of the animal foods, this is what you find here, is that there is an increased risk for coronary heart disease with animal products. But what outperformed it? Those less healthy plant foods, even more harmful than animal products.
What are the examples of that, Maureen?
So juice was one that they listed. And then also just looking at, when we do things like frying the French fries and the potato chips, all the sweets, the candies, etc., all of that was labeled into that category. So basically, if it isn't whole, refined grains were also in there. Okay, so now this is the part that I wanted to point out. Notice the number of servings that those that are eating the healthy plant foods can actually get up to, right? Because they're so calorically light. You can just munch away on bowls and bowls of this stuff, right? They only top out at 10 servings when you're working on those things that are more calorically dense. So meet your other 99%. Did you know you're only 1% human? The other 90, and we went through that whole Human Genome Project and we thought we would know all about our health. But it turns out there's a lot more to this picture than that. We're 99% bacterial DNA. And that has to do with our microbes that are in our gut. And they have a profound impact on our health. So think of the microbiome as this beautiful rainforest, right? With all these different species in there, archaea, bacteria, fungi, viruses. And really when you are having a stool, 60% of it by weight is actually bacteria, right? Then we have a lot of bacteria in here. And why is that? Because through evolution, we have outsourced our carbohydrate digestion to our bacteria. That's what they're doing down there. And we want to feed those little guys because what do they give us in turn? They give us short-chain fatty acids, hormones, and vitamins. They're very powerful to our health. This is a graphic that I kind of think is helpful in understanding how the bacteria are eating this fiber that we're sending down to them. And then they're producing butyrate, which is just a beautiful short-chain fatty acid that is really important to inhibiting the bad bacteria, providing energy to the colon cells, and maintaining a mucus layer here in the colon. And then if there's extra, if the colon wall is in good shape, then the extra gets into the circulation. It helps reduce cholesterol, control appetite, improve insulin sensitivity, prevent cancer, reduce inflammation through the whole body, and prevent any autoimmune situations because it's keeping that immune peace. So bacteria need fiber to maintain a healthy gut wall. So think about the American diet. What has happened to the fiber? Okay, now what's right underneath the gut? Well, 70% of your immune system lies right underneath the gut. And therefore, when you have dysbiosis or the tight junctions are no longer tight, then you can end up with a leaky gut and inappropriate bacteria can get across into where it's not supposed to, and you can have a reaction to it. So I'm pretty sure most of you have heard about this, where they took mice with sterile guts and they populated with human stool from an obese person versus a normal BMI person and fed them the same diet, and look what happened. Such a difference. So that microbiome is very powerful. But diet should not be ignored, because actually they were using more of a refined high-fat chow, and a follow-up study looked at what happens if you choose some different kinds of diets. So here they looked at unrefined chow, and as long as the mouse was fed the unrefined chow, the microbiota stayed healthy, and the body was healthy, and they were producing the short-chain fatty acids. However, if you refine the chow, the microbiome changed, but actually the mouse did okay, but no longer producing those short-chain fatty acids. If you now not only refined it, but added high fat to it, now you end up with both body fat and glucose intolerance. So the microbiome is linked to both health and disease. And this is kind of a summary article that was done in 2018, where they looked at all the studies to date. This is really an area where I would say the information is exploding. They're talking about how we're moving from correlation to causation and ultimately hoping to translate this into therapies. This is impacting not only the GI system, autoimmune conditions, but the microbiome is considered to be part of the picture with coronary artery disease, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, arthritis, mood disorders, migraines, cirrhosis, obesity, diabetes, you name it, it's involved. So where do we get our microbiome from? Well, it starts off, if you are born vaginally, then you get a dose of bacteria from that experience, followed by breastfeeding. Breastfeeding actually, in breast milk, there's over 200 types of human milk oligosaccharides. Those oligosaccharides do not feed the infant. They feed the bacteria in the gut. They're undigestible by the infant. So, and we know that breastfeeding is associated with reductions in obesity and diabetes, etc. But what about antibiotic exposure? This can really change the picture of the microbiome. But typically, by the time somebody is 3 years old, they have the microbiome of an adult, and it's as unique as a fingerprint. But let's talk about this dysbiosis, when things get kind of interrupted. What is dysbiosis? Well, it's really when you alter the microbiota in the gut. And then when that is altered, then the gut becomes more permeable, and there's more chance of release of bacterial endotoxin and increased risk for disease states. Again, if you think of that rainforest experience, antibiotics are like a napalm for the rainforest. A lot of different medications actually negatively impact the microbiome, but look at antibiotics. 5-ABCitro drops 35% of the microbiome. And you think you're going to recover that in a couple of weeks? More like 1 to 2 years to recover that. And oftentimes there's a permanent loss of diversity in the gut. So why do we know this? When we look at some of the tribal experiences, what is happening when you lose diversity? Is there an increased risk of vulnerability to disease? Each species of bacteria has its own job to do. A bird is not the same as a mouse in the rainforest. So the tribal gut has around 1,500 to 1,600 species of bacteria, and they're eating, still at this stage, 100 to 150 grams of fiber a day. Well, what about the Western gut? Well, we're down to somewhere between 300 and 1,000, and of course we're eating about 17 grams of fiber a day. So how do you optimize the microbiome for a patient if they decide they want to improve this? Well, I love this work from Rob Knight out of UC San Diego. He created this crowd-funded citizen science project called the American Gut. And he's processing over 100,000 samples of stool a year, and it's one of the largest microbiome researchers in the world. It costs $99, and you fill out a 40-page questionnaire and send a sample. And you can do it as a couple or as a foursome of the family, see how much that you associate. And those people that have dogs in the family tend to have more similarities. Others, not so much similarities, just interesting. But what do you get back from Rob? What does he send you back? So he extracts the DNA, amplifies and sequences it, and then translates it into what microorganisms are present, their relative abundance, and the functional role they play. And then he contextualizes it with all the participants that have participated up to this point. So he says to have a healthy gut, he has several recommendations. He goes, the most profound healthy guts are associated with eating 30 or more diverse plant foods a week. Okay, so he's really saying, gotta get that fiber. Okay, why 30 diverse plant foods? Can't I just take a powder? Well, there's only one type of fiber here. If you eat a plant, a single plant will have 6 to 10 different types of fiber in it. So it's a different source of food, and you're feeding different parts of the rainforest. Number 2, avoid the processed food, because this is feeding the wrong part of the microbiome that's going to be attacking the bowel wall. And then here we'll just show, can you see the difference here when you process something? What is actually happening when you have whole grain versus flour? Even though it's whole grain flour, is it the same? No, the fibers have been fractured, and so because of that, they are more likely to be digested in the early part of the gut and not make it to feed the little guys. We gotta get the food down too. Okay, number, 3, enjoy fermented foods. So this was so helpful to understand how sauerkraut is made. You take that cabbage in the field, right, and you chop it, add some salt, get it under its own fluids, and put it in a cool place, and it turns into sauerkraut. Tons of bacteria on it. Where did those bacteria come from? All plants have their own microbiome already there. So those microbiomes help decompose the cabbage in the field, ferment it in the jar, or digest it when you're eating the cabbage whole. It actually comes with its own probiotic. Hence, you eat the plants, you get the probiotic with the prebiotic. You can take a supplement as well, but it's just really not as powerful, and it's tricky to get past the stomach acid with the capsules. The number 4 is honor the circadian rhythm. We can't ignore the fact that good rest and movement impact our experience and matching the daylight hours. People that are working through the night shift, I'm sure you can feel the difference when you are switching shifts, and that feeling has a lot to do with actually the microbiome being under duress. Okay, so far we've talked about kidney disease prevention, but what about reversal? Is it, am I gonna show you some miracles here or what? Okay, so I'm gonna introduce you to Brooke Goldner, who is a physician as well. And so she authored this book called Goodbye Lupus because she had lupus herself for 11 years, right? And so when she was in medical school, actually she ended up in the hospital with both lupus nephritis and nephritis and stage 4 of kidney disease. At the time when she decided, she got better with a lot of use of good medicine, she got better. But then at the time she decided she was going to get married, she went on a diet. And what did she choose for a diet? She chose green smoothies, and I'll go over those in a minute. But basically hyper-nourishing foods, she says, rather than recreational foods. It put her lupus not only into remission, but all of her markers for the first time in 11 years became negative. And slowly, over 2 years, never reoccurring again, she stayed on the smoothies. She's tapered off all of her medicines. A few years later than that, she went through 2 uneventful pregnancies and remains lupus-free. So when she graduated, she became board certified in neurology, but because of writing this book, patients really started coming to her because of this experience. So now she has a whole program where she has reversed autoimmune diseases using supermarket foods. And then recently she now published in this journal about this experience where she says lupus nephritis reverses with a raw vegan nutrition protocol. Now, what does she actually give these people? So it's basically, you gotta buy a vitamin syrup, but you're gonna be eating a lot of greens, okay? So it's about 1 pound of greens every time you drink a pitcher. 1 pound of greens, about a half cup to a cup of ground flax, a lot of water, and then a little bit of fruit to sweeten it so it's drinkable. On the side, they munch on raw vegetables from cruciferous family largely and dip it in avocado to make it a little more pleasant. So now, I'm thinking, can I even do this? This is tricky, right? I may want the benefits from it, but can somebody do it? So she really talks about, you do not get your dopamine hits from food anymore. You have to do other things. Go shopping, have sex, exercise, whatever you're going to do. It's not going to be from food right now. You are healing yourself, right? So it's really, she calls all other foods recreational. These are the nourishing foods. So it's really, if you think about our microbiome part, it's like a microbiome reset, right? All those leafy greens, all those rocks comes both the fiber and the new bacteria. So it's healing the gut wall, which is possibly part of the picture from autoimmune disease. So here's her case. So this patient came to her with the GFR in the teens, right? Started on a raw, whole food plant-based regime, and slowly the GFR started to climb after the 6 weeks. Now the patient thought, okay, because her program is for 6 weeks, she thought, now I'm going to go on my own here, and she started including other vegan foods that included oil, and she dropped her smoothie intake. And so it started to decline a little bit. She said, okay, it's not worth it, I'm going to stay in this program for now. So she maintains herself off of the transplant list using this at this point. So do all bacteria actually produce these great postbiotics like short-chain fatty acids? Unfortunately not. There's some bad guys in the picture too. So this is the work out of the Cleveland Clinic, Wilson Tang, that actually discovered that bacteria were involved with the heart events. And what it is choline and carnitine. Choline is high in eggs and carnitine mostly in red meats. As it comes down to the gut, there's several different species of microbes that digest that and create TMA, trimethylamine. And then when it goes through the liver, it actually becomes TMAO, so it gets oxidized. This product is something that actually negatively affects several organs in the body. It actually lays down cholesterol plaques and prevents removal of it, the body's attempt to remove it. It has direct impact on the heart and the kidney and diabetes and obesity. So also associated with Alzheimer's. It's a bad guy. A lot of different things. TMAO is actually present in deep sea fish, like the tuna fish. So it makes me think back to tofu versus tuna. It's present in them because it's like a little bit like antifreeze, so they can really dive very deep, and they don't lose mobility when they're in that deep cold water. So it's good for them, not so good for us. So how did they know that the bacteria were involved in this TMAO production? Again, this was just such a fun study. Okay, so they actually convinced a bunch of vegans and omnivores to eat a steak, okay? Everybody's eaten about an 8-ounce steak, and then they also gave them an L-carnitine capsule as well to see what would happen with their TMAO levels. Well, the vegan didn't produce any TMAO, but the omnivores did. So the vegan group, why weren't they producing it? They didn't have the bacteria present, right? So the omnivores did. Now, and the same with the capsule, right? Showing that it shot up about 6-fold over baseline. So that makes you realize now, and then a subsequent study they did actually looked at how long would it take if somebody who had a plant-based diet switches over and starts eating an animal-based diet before they start producing TMAO. It takes about 28 days. So you can flip back and forth. And when you think about our early ancestors, they got meat, but it was pretty much like a kill once in a while. And they didn't have the microbiome to get the insult from the TMAO because they hadn't been eating that much of it. So eating a little meat once in a while was fine. So does what you eat matter? 3 pounds a day, 3 to 5 pounds a day, 1,000 pounds a year, 80,000 pounds of food in your lifetime. Do you think that doesn't matter relative to a handful of pills? Our food is not only our fuel, but it actually builds our tissues. So can we change the gut microbiome? This was an interesting study done in 2014. So up to this point, they had really seen that they could shift the microbiome in mice, but they hadn't seen that much in humans. And so in this study, they put one group on a 100% plant-based diet, and the other group, they put them on no plants at all, okay? So 100% animal-based meat, eggs, and cheese. What they found was there was a lot, this is the plant-based diet versus the animal-based diet. So you can see the diet was very different in fiber and protein and so on. But what was probably most impressive to me is what happened to the microbiome. So here's when the stool is coming, the food is coming through with the marker. And on the plant-based diet, there was good preservation of the microbiome. But on the animal-based diet, within the day, when there was no fiber present from them, there was a huge shift in the bacteria. What they started to lose was they were losing those fiber-sensitive bacteria like Prevotella. And many of these bacteria were not seen in the washout period, so there may have been a permanent loss of diversity just from 5 days on this 100% animal-based diet. And probably more concerning was that B. Wadsworthia was present, which we know has sulfur groups that attack the bowel wall and are linked to irritable bowel syndrome. So this was ramping up not only in numbers, but also in activity while on that animal-based diet. So what can a diet history reveal? Well, if you're talking to the patient and happen to ask them what they're eating, and they tell you, oh, yeah, I'm on this carnivore, keto, paleo thing, I think it's really important to ask them the details. Are you eating any vegetables at all? Because we don't want them to have the bowel wall breakdown. So just including some plants can make such a difference. We don't want them to lose that protective barrier to the gut. And if they're eating meat and animal products 3 to 4 times a day, it places them in that TMAO spike, putting them at risk for 5 to 10 of the big killers in the US, heart disease to kidney disease. Instead, they can get their protein from beans. Lovely, lovely beans. Not only the musical fruit, but the magical fruit. Okay, so then they're going to come to you saying this, hey, I can't tolerate those beans. I think I'm allergic to them. Okay, so some gas is normal. And also remember, most of America is constipated. When you're constipated, it really leads to bloating because you're plugged on the bottom end. So the gas can't get through. But maybe it's the gut needs repair. And now how do you actually repair the gut so that you have the right players there? Think about a team. If you're missing players on the team, you don't play so well. And you need to get those players back, right? So how do we get the players back? You've got to eat the microbiome builders, right? So my favorite are the FODMAPs, okay? And this is actually supported by some of this research as well. The FODMAP foods are gas producers. But if you never, and so sometimes there'll be recommendations, oh, take these foods out so you don't get any GI irritation, right? But in fact, these are the foods that if you present in small quantities, build up the bacteria that can then digest those. So if you take them out, you're never gonna get there. But you have to include them in small quantities. One of the best is Jerusalem artichokes, have lots of oligosaccharides in them, but also the allium family, or again, our beans and barleys, lentils, chickpeas. Now, jumping to a little bit different subject, but kind of related. What about oil? Okay? If you think about oil, we're going to talk about 8 ounces or a cup of oil. And where does that come from? Well, that comes from 350 olives. And now what have I done? I took all the fiber and nutrients out, and I'm just giving you the calories, which America, do we need more calories? Okay. And instead, I could be, instead of eating that ½ pound of oil, calorically matched would be 3 pounds of beans, right? That would really be building my microbiome. How about 6 pounds of fruit? Or 18 pounds of leafy greens, right? Okay. You can see how, if a person is just able to cut out a small amount of oil, you make room in the diet for the fiber. Heal with whole plant food. So the microbiome will evolve, okay? It has a life generation, it's only 20 minutes. So in a single human day, you've gone through 1,800 years of microbial evolution. Give it the food that it needs to start building the new microbiome. Again, T. Colin Campbell, I'm going to put his little summary statement here. The treatment effect of a plant-based diet is broad in scope, rapid in response, and often life-saving. It cannot be duplicated by animal-based foods, processed foods, or drugs. What about Al? Let's listen to see what happened to Al, okay? He says, and you can see that how much he's changed here. He's smiling now. Anything worth doing is worth doing to wretched excess, okay? In 2 months, what had happened to his picture? Well, now he's choosing to eat that less than 10% low-fat, whole food, plant-based diet. He says, I love the food I eat, and I never cheat. He went down 30 pounds in 2 months. Now, his wife thought he had cancer, but he didn't, okay? So his heart angina went away, and he's walking again. sometimes up to 5 miles, and he even takes walks up at 6,000 feet, no problem. This cardiologist was very pleased and was able to get him off almost all of his medicines. He's still on a blood pressure agent and something for GERD. He used to take naps in the afternoon, and of course he used to fall down the stairs. But now there's no fatigue, dizziness, no pulse, no weakness. He's energetic and moving around. Instead of canceling vacations, he actually cranked up his RV and drove across America by himself, hitting spot after spot to attend the wedding of his niece. And this one was such an interesting thing. At 48, when he had the cabbage, they pulled the vessel out of the leg and he had a big reticularis in that leg and a lot of swelling. A year after he had been on the whole food and plant-based diet, swelling and discoloration disappeared. What about his numbers? Well, we would expect his cholesterol to be under 150, and it achieved that. Okay, but what about that GFR? We've got over 200 years of nephrology experience in the room, I'm sure. What are you going to say that GFR is going to do? Okay, somebody's believing me. I mean, we'd expect it to stay stable, right? Or maybe even decline. That's kind of what we see in patients. Well, it went up. It went up quite a bit. I used a couple different calculations. Some of them were saying up to 77. But he got a lot of function back. Remember Al's wisdom? Anything worth doing is worth doing to wretched excess. Is it possible that extreme healing is possible with extreme diet change? If you switch this to looking like this, can the body heal? And what is extreme? A cabbage, dialysis, or a smoothie? Okay, well, you know, Al eats the presidential diet. You may know that Dean Ornish got a hold of President Clinton and put him on this diet as well, because he is having heart disease as well. And Al says, I eat the same diet as President Clinton, but he cheats and I never do. So the reality is, most of us are a little bit more like President Clinton. So when you're working with patients and they struggle with compliance with this, it's good to help them know that you keep learning on this path. If you're trying to lean into healing, turn a bad food day into good data and keep improving slowly over time. Lean into the journey and get support from others. So if you're looking to jump a little deeper into this, I left some references on the back table there, but there are a variety of different ways of getting involved a little bit more with this. You can take a culinary medicine curriculum over at Stanford, or you can go to a conference learning a little bit more about this, join the Physicians Committee about Responsible Medicine, or take Tifon Campbell's course as well. And then you can have this free journal. It's the International Journal of Disease Reversal and Prevention. And its editor is the former president and fellow of the American College of Cardiology, Kim Williams. And he says, really, we're looking at this journal to dedicate it to the highest integrity research and completely free of charge. We believe that life-saving research should be free to all. And they're really trying to avoid having any of the paywalls that might occur by having the industry involved. Now, another bit of advice from Al, he says, I didn't decide to live longer to be boring, you know, so he's so glad that he's inside his home anymore. He's out there going on cruises, so they have this holistic holiday at sea where they have all these healthy foods on the boat, as well as they have the recovery panel, where they have these people like Al who have had massive recovery in their health and going on a plant-based diet, and you get to hear from all of those. And I think about the number one reason at UC that people retire early is because of their health. Okay, so if you want to get the full value of your retirement, you want to be not only hitting it with having enough money and enough time, but you gotta have your health too, right? So make it fun to learn about this, whether you go to a cruise or some plant-based retreats, like Rick Esselstyn, who is the son of Caldwell Esselstyn, runs these Plant Strong retreats, Sedona or North Carolina, make fantastic food for you and give you all this education at the same time. Or go to the Plant Powered Italia with the ultramarathoner Rich Roll. who, him and his wife do these big events with lots of Italian food covered in cheese made from nuts. So it's absolutely delicious way of eating. Or if you want to do something more locally, I have the flyers on the back for Get Healthy Sacramento coming in February. I get to learn a little bit more about it right here in our own hometown. You can also watch a documentary. These are 3 of the documentaries that I think are very powerful, Forks Over Knives, What the Health, and recently came out Game Changers, which really talks about athletes getting that performance edge by improving their circulation. Because really what's happening is you're improving your circulation in plants. And by improving your circulation, you improve your performance. It's quite an interesting thing. So now moms don't have to be the only one telling people to eat their vegetables, right? The doctor can too. Look at all those healthy plant foods. Oh. All right, thank you.